The church was silent, not a reverent silence, but the thick, suffocating vacuum of absolute dread. The moment stretched out, elastic and agonizing. I could hear my own breathing, sharp and shallow, under the ivory lace veil. My breath smelled faintly of peppermint and expensive, controlled fury. Richard stood across from me. He was wearing the custom Italian tuxedo I had helped him pick out, the one that cost more than my first car. His eyes, usually glittering with that practiced, shallow charm, were wet with real tears. He thought these were tears of joy. He was wrong. They were about to become tears of terror. The officiant, a nervous man Richard's mother had insisted upon, cleared his throat. "Richard, do you take Anya to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Richard took a deep breath, his voice cracked with forced emotion. "I do." He was holding my hands, his palms clammy and cold. I did not squeeze back. I just registered the temperature, the texture of his skin, filing it away as irrelevant data. I felt nothing for him in that moment. No love, no hate, just the clinical focus of a surgeon before the first incision. It was my turn. The officiant looked at me, a hopeful, saccharine smile pasted on his face. "Anya, do you take Richard?" I opened my mouth, but I didn't say "I do." I said something else entirely. Something the 200 guests packed into that gilded, overpriced cathedral would never forget. Before I could finish, the light suddenly dipped. Not a flicker, but a smooth, deliberate transition to darkness. A low, electronic hum filled the space, vibrating through the thick Persian carpet. The only light left was a sharp, brilliant rectangle cast high on the marble wall, directly behind the altar. A giant, high-definition image sprang to life. It was a still photograph, a corporate logo, not Richard's sleek, self-aggrandizing real estate brand, but the severe, bold seal of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. The room erupted into a confusing murmur. Guests craned their necks. Richard's mother, Brenda, seated in the front row, let out a tiny, high-pitched squawk of indignation. She thought it was a technical glitch, a vendor mistake. She was already half rising from her chair, her face a mask of scarlet fury. Richard's clammy grip tightened on my hands, desperation in his touch. He whispered, low and frantic, "Anya, what the hell is happening? Tell them to fix it." I finally looked him straight in the eye. My face was expressionless. I pulled my hands free from his grasp. The projector, silent and relentless, advanced to the next slide. This one was a financial statement. Bold red font dominated the page. It listed assets, liabilities, and one massive damning category: fraudulent loan defaults. The total amount due was catastrophic. It was Richard's entire empire, laid bare. The camera then cut to a video clip, perfectly timed. Richard, laughing, kissing a woman who was definitely not me. In a hotel lobby, I recognized instantly. The audio was crystal clear. His voice. "This wedding is just the perfect cover." Anya's signature is gold. The gasp that rippled through the crowd felt like a physical wave. Richard stared at the screen, his mouth agape. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like bleached bone. His meticulously arranged tuxedo suddenly looked like a cheap costume. I stepped back, adjusting my veil with deliberate calm. I looked down at the pristine white folder in my hand. I hadn't come here to marry him. I had come here to execute a corporate takedown. But let me back up. My name is Anya Lynn. I am a forensic accountant. I don't just count money. I follow the money. I find the lies hidden between the decimal points. My whole life is built on structure, logic, and meticulous documentation. That's how my immigrant parents raised me. You don't get ahead by being flashy. You get ahead by being smarter, quieter, and having your paperwork perfect. I met Richard in a very corporate way. It was a charity gala, all slick suits and polite pretension. He was exactly the opposite of me. Loud, effortlessly charming, a golden retriever in a tailored suit. He worked in high-end commercial real estate, or as he called it, shaping the skyline. I called it moving money from one rich pocket to another. He pursued me hard. Flowers, expensive dinners, the whole 9 yards. For a while, I liked the chaos he brought. It was a counterpoint to my spreadsheet-driven existence. He was the risk I allowed myself to take. He seemed genuinely proud of my work, calling me his brilliant little number cruncher. The term grated, but I let it go. He was handsome. He made me feel seen in a way my spreadsheets never could. After 6 months, he proposed. It was absurdly romantic. Venice, a gondola, a 4-carat diamond that looked like it belonged in a museum. I said yes. I thought I was buying into stability, into the future Richard painted so vividly, a future of luxury homes and successful joint ventures. I thought his love was as solid as my own meticulous accounting ledgers. I was wrong. It was hollow, like a stage prop. The problem started immediately after the engagement party. That's when I met Brenda, Richard's mother. Brenda wasn't just a controlling parent, she was a self-appointed deity. She had that brittle, desperate glamour of a woman constantly fighting off the last 20 years. Everything was a performance. She judged my dress, my job, my parents' perfectly respectable, albeit simple house. She insisted Richard's business was exploding. She claimed he was about to finalize a massive deal, a whole downtown development. This, she explained, was why the wedding had to be spectacular. "It's not just a wedding, Anya," she'd purr, her voice dripping with passive aggression. "It's a merger of our visibility. You need to look the part. Richard needs to show he's marrying into substance." Her language always bothered me. Merger, visibility, substance. It was all business, but the numbers never added up. I remember the first major red flag. Richard was trying to get me to co-sign a loan for a new office space. It was a 7-figure long. I, of course, requested the financial disclosures. My accountant training kicked in instantly. The figures were vague. The assets seemed inflated. I politely declined to co-sign. Richard got genuinely angry. It was cold, hard fury. He accused me of not trusting him, of being too focused on minutia. He claimed I was being petty about a simple signature. I stood firm. "It's not petty, Richard. It's $2 million. And these statements look like they were drawn up by a 5th grader. He backed down eventually, smoothing it over with a barrage of affection and another designer handbag. I should have ended it then. I ignored my own expertise. I chose emotion over logic, and that was my first and greatest failure. Well, what if I did that work? I would never decease. Brenda took over the wedding planning like a hostile corporate raider. She vetoed my quiet garden venue and booked the most ostentatious cathedral in the city. She replaced my simple, elegant dress selection with a poofy, beaded monstrosity she called regal. I hated it, but Richard kept saying, "Just let her have this, sweetie. It means so much to her. She wants the spectacle." The spectacle came with a horrific price tag. The catering alone was 6 figures. The flowers were flown in from Holland. Every vendor seemed to be the most expensive possible choice. And every single invoice, when I happened to glance at them because habit, felt off. The vendor names looked professional, but the payment terms were bizarre. Massive upfront cash deposits, very short contracts. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were all shell companies funneling money somewhere unseen. My logical brain was screaming. I started looking harder at Richard's work. He spent less and less time in the office. He was always on his phone, stepping outside for private client calls. He'd come home late, smelling vaguely of expensive cologne that wasn't mine and sometimes faint cigar smoke, a habit he didn't have. He was emotionally distant, distracted, constantly stressed. I'd ask him simple questions like, "How did the closing go on the Elm Street deal?" He'd just wave his hand dismissively. "Done, baby, cash in hand." But the cash wasn't showing up in the accounts he'd show me months ago. I noticed he started receiving physical mail at the apartment that was addressed to a P.O. box, which he immediately shredded. He was becoming secretive, paranoid, jumpy. One evening, I was cleaning up after a casual dinner. Richard had left his laptop open, which he never did. I knew I shouldn't look. I was crossing a professional and personal line. But the accountant in me had reached critical mass. The debt on my conscience was outweighed by the debt in his accounts. I saw an email chain open. It wasn't about real estate. It was about a company named Olympus Holdings. It sounded legitimate, but the email was from Brenda. The subject line, finalizing the documentation for collateral, the wedding gift. I clicked it open. My blood went cold. The attached documents weren't wedding plans. They were loan applications. A massive, unsecured bridge loan. The collateral? Richard's supposed portfolio, which I already suspected was vapor, but the key to making the loan look legitimate was the signature of a trusted, high-value individual. The document specified the required spouse needed: unimpeachable credit, stable, high-level employment, and no outstanding liabilities. In other words, me. They were planning to rush me into signing something post-vows, perhaps disguised as a marriage certificate or a property deed, using my name as the clean surface for their dirty money. The wedding was the staging ground. I closed the laptop gently. My hands were shaking not from sorrow but from adrenaline. This wasn't just cheating. This wasn't just a greedy mother-in-law. This was calculated, white-collar crime. I wasn't getting married. I was being leveraged. Richard wasn't just a cheating jerk. He was a financial predator. I realized I was sleeping next to a criminal mastermind, or at least the handsome puppet of one. I had to get concrete proof. I couldn't just leave him. I had to expose them. I needed to move from suspicion to ironclad evidence before they pushed me into that church. I knew I couldn't trust Richard, and I certainly couldn't trust his mother. My career was on the line if this scandal touched me, let alone if I unwittingly signed those papers. I needed to play the perfect fiancé while simultaneously building an impenetrable legal case against them both. My focus became singular: collect, categorize, confirm. I started small. I used an old accounting trick on Richard's discarded burner phone, which I found hidden inside a hollowed-out book on his shelf. I connected it briefly to my own secure server. The data dump was ugly. Text confirmed the cheating, not just with one woman, but multiple. Their names were generic, interchangeable. He called them stress relief. One particular thread contained a video snippet: Richard, drunk, telling the woman that he only married boring Anya because she was the golden key to the big scores. That was the moment the last shred of my former affection died. He hadn't just used me, he had actively mocked me. The physical betrayal was less painful than the financial one. The real breaking point came when I found the core of their scam. I waited until Richard was on a supposed golf trip. I broke into his locked home office, which I had never been allowed to enter. It was a treasure trove of financial malfeasance. There were stacked binders full of Shell Corporation records. They had systematically created a dozen dummy companies, all with identical P.O. box addresses, and revolving board members, mostly elderly cousins Richard rarely spoke to. The key was the property portfolio. He claimed to own 3 high-value commercial properties. I looked up the official county records. All 3 properties were under active foreclosure proceedings. They were leveraged far beyond their value. Richard and Brenda weren't rich. They were catastrophically insolvent. The wedding wasn't a show of wealth. It was a desperate attempt to appear wealthy long enough to secure the final, massive bridge loan, the one they needed my signature for. My clean reputation was the only asset they had left. The documents specified the loan had a tight deadline, 48 hours after the scheduled wedding ceremony. This meant they planned to execute the fraud immediately after the vows, possibly rushing me into a private room under the guise of signing the marriage license where the loan documents would be cleverly embedded. They needed me compliant, deliriously happy, and legally obligated. They wanted to use the euphoria of the wedding to trick me into financial ruin, and then use the subsequent inevitable legal fallout to shield themselves while blaming me. I realized I couldn't go to the police yet. If I filed the report, Richard and Brenda would scatter and destroy the evidence. I needed the smoking gun, the final, irrefutable paper trail, which meant I needed to let the plan proceed right up to the very last minute. The revenge had to be public, total, and irreversible. It wasn't about saving face. It was about saving my financial life and ensuring they paid the highest possible price for their greed. I spent the rest of the night printing everything, making 3 certified copies of every single incriminating document, organizing them into the pristine white folder. The day after my discovery, I hired 2 people. First, a highly recommended private investigator, Mr. Reyes. I didn't hire him to dig up dirt. I hired him to document my evidence and coordinate the legal strike. I presented him with the organized binders. He was silent for a full 10 minutes as he reviewed the Olympus Holdings documentation. When he looked up, his face was grim. This isn't small time, Miss Lynn. This is SEC territory. The IRS will have a field day. I told him the entire timeline, including the wedding, the 48-hour loan deadline, and the plan to entrap me. I needed him to file the initial reports with the appropriate federal agencies, the SEC and the IRS, but only to release the full documentation upon my specific, nonverbal signal at the altar. It was a preemptive strike, a financial nuke that needed to be dropped at T-0. He agreed. He found the audacity of their plan insulting to his profession. Second, I hired a technology expert. His job was to install a state-of-the-art projector and sound system into the cathedral. I told Richard and Brenda it was my surprise gift to them. A high-tech slideshow of our lives, darling, I lied smoothly. They eat it up. They loved the idea of another grand, visible expense. The tech expert worked directly for me, installing a specialized hidden server in the back room and testing the connectivity. He made sure the connection was secure, robust, and could only be triggered from the transmitter hidden in my bouquet. The final piece of the plan involved coordinating the personnel. I called my 2 most trusted colleagues in forensic accounting. They didn't know the full extent of the scandal, only that I was about to expose a massive financial fraud that involved my fiancé. They agreed to be special guests, attending the ceremony, but actually waiting outside in a discreet black sedan. Their role, once the initial shockwave hit, they were to immediately enter the church, identify themselves as my legal representatives, and serve the papers. The hardest part was maintaining the facade. I had to endure Brenda's endless, condescending critiques of my hair, my shoes, and my general existence. I had to let Richard touch me, kiss me, and whisper sweet, poisonous lies about our future. Every time he did, I saw the burner phone texts, the foreclosure documents, and the SEC logo projected onto the back of my eyelids. I became a machine. My face was programmed for radiant joy. My words were rehearsed for compliance. My heart was dead. I used the time to finalize the presentation. It was elegant, brutal, and simple. Slide 1, the SEC logo. Slide 2, the summary of the fraudulent loans. Slide 3, the video evidence of Richard's betrayal and his confession of using me. Slide 4, a screenshot of the email proving Brenda's direct involvement. The final slide simply read, "The wedding is off. The arrests are pending." I printed the entire 40-page report, neatly bound in a bright white folder. That folder was my peace offering to the IRS and my weapon against my almost husband. First, a highly recommended private investigator, Mr. Reyes. I didn't hire him to dig up dirt. I hired him to document my evidence and coordinate the legal strike. I presented him with the organized binders. He was silent for a full 10 minutes as he reviewed the Olympus Holdings documentation. When he looked up, his face was grim. This isn't small time, Miss Lynn. This is SEC territory. The IRS will have a field day. I told him the entire timeline, including the wedding, the 48-hour loan deadline, and the plan to entrap me. I needed him to file the initial reports with the appropriate federal agencies, the SEC and the IRS, but only to release the full documentation upon my specific, nonverbal signal at the altar. It was a preemptive strike, a financial nuke that needed to be dropped at T-0. He agreed. He found the audacity of their plan insulting to his profession. Second, I hired a technology expert. His job was to install a state-of-the-art projector and sound system into the cathedral. I told Richard and Brenda it was my surprise gift to them. A high-tech slideshow of our lives, darling. I lied smoothly. They ate it up. They loved the idea of another grand, visible expense. The tech expert worked directly for me, installing a specialized hidden server in the back room and testing the connectivity. He made sure the connection was secure, robust, and could only be triggered from the transmitter hidden in my bouquet. The final piece of the plan involved coordinating the personnel. I called my two most trusted colleagues in forensic accounting. They didn't know the full extent of the scandal, only that I was about to expose a massive financial fraud that involved my fiancé. They agreed to be special guests, attending the ceremony but actually waiting outside in a discreet black sedan. Their role, once the initial shockwave hit, they were to immediately enter the church, identify themselves as my legal representatives, and serve the papers. The hardest part was maintaining the facade. I had to endure Brenda's endless, condescending critiques of my hair, my shoes, and my general existence. I had to let Richard touch me, kiss me, and whisper sweet, poisonous lies about our future. Every time he did, I saw the burner phone texts, the foreclosure documents, and the SEC logo projected onto the back of my eyelids. I became a machine. My face was programmed for radiant joy. My words were rehearsed for compliance. My heart was dead. I used the time to finalize the presentation. It was elegant, brutal, and simple. Slide 1, the SEC logo. Slide 2, the summary of the fraudulent loans. Slide 3, the video evidence of Richard's betrayal and his confession of using me. Slide 4, a screenshot of the email proving Brenda's direct involvement. The final slide simply read, "The wedding is off. The arrests are pending." I printed the entire 40-page report, neatly bound in a bright white folder. That folder was my peace offering to the IRS and my weapon against my almost husband. The wedding day arrived. It was oppressively bright, an awful irony for the dark work I was about to do. I sat in the bridal suite, perfectly made up, wearing the heavy, overbeaded gown Brenda had forced on me. I didn't look like a vengeful accountant. I looked like a pristine, expensive victim. The hidden transmitter, small as a sugar cube, was tucked securely into the ribbon of my bouquet. The walk down the aisle felt like a slow-motion descent into a moral abyss. All those faces smiling at me, my parents looking so proud, completely unaware of the bomb I was about to detonate. I tried not to make eye contact. I just focused on Richard, standing at the altar, grinning his perfect, confident, predatory grin. He was already rehearsing the lie he was about to make me sign. When I finally reached him, he took my hands. He squeezed them tightly, a possessive gesture. The officiant began the ceremony. He read the sugary script about two souls becoming one, about the sanctity of commitment. I felt nothing but cold, absolute resolve. Then came the vows. Richard started first. He had written his own, and they were, of course, magnificent. They were about destiny and unconditional love and building a future that shines. Every word was a calculated piece of theatrical garbage designed to manipulate me into compliance. He looked like the perfect groom. His performance was flawless. As the officiant paused, transitioning the solemnity to me, I gave the signal. It wasn't a word. It was a tiny, imperceptible twitch of my finger, pressing the button hidden in my bouquet ribbon. The change was instantaneous and devastating. The lights went down. The soft, classical music that had been playing died abruptly. The huge, bright projection of the SEC logo slammed onto the marble wall. Richard froze. His smile evaporated. Brenda, in the front row, shrieked. It was an animal sound, pure shock and rage. The narrator's voice, pre-recorded by my tech expert, was calm, professional, and damning. It introduced the evidence. The audience collectively gasped as the fraud figures appeared. Then, the screen cut to the video of Richard's infidelity and confession. Brenda was out of her seat instantly. She didn't look at Richard, she looked at me. She knew. She recognized the methodical destruction of her entire life plan. "You bitch! You gold-digging whore! You set us up!" she screamed, rushing the altar. The chaos was total. Guests were shouting. Some were crying. My two colleagues burst through the side door, calmly navigating the hysteria. They were wearing dark suits and holding official-looking envelopes. They approached the altar. I stood there, still and silent, the calm eye in the hurricane. I looked at Richard. He was pale, shaking violently, staring at the financial report on the screen. He was completely defeated. He knew the numbers. He knew what they meant. My colleague stepped forward, ignoring Brenda, who was now screaming about lawyers. He laid the SEC and IRS documents right on the velvet altar cushion. He looked Richard directly in the face and said, "Mr. Davies, you have been served. All your assets are frozen, and the relevant authorities have been notified of your immediate flight risk." The final slide flashed on the screen. "The wedding is off. The arrests are pending." The pandemonium didn't last long. Mr. Reyes, the PI, had done his job perfectly. Two plainclothes officers who were waiting discreetly outside, I paid them a retainer for security, entered the church immediately after the papers were served. They were professional and highly efficient. Brenda was hysterical. She physically fought the officer trying to escort her out. She ripped the veil off my head, screaming about how I had ruined her family's name. She was finally subdued and taken away in a police car, still railing against me. Richard, by contrast, was silent. He looked broken. He didn't try to deny anything. He knew the evidence was concrete. He just kept whispering, "Anya, how could you?" I looked at him, finally speaking the truth that wasn't rehearsed. "You taught me how, Richard. You showed me the cost of trusting numbers over instinct. I'm a forensic accountant. I don't look the other way." The police led him away in handcuffs. The spectacle was total. The guests, initially shocked, quickly separated into two camps: those who felt awful for me, and those who were enjoying the most dramatic story of the decade. My parents rushed up to me, horrified but also immediately supportive. My father, a man of few words, just held my hand and said, "Paperwork is always strongest, Anya." The consequences for Richard and Brenda were swift and brutal. The SEC and IRS moved in immediately. The fraudulent bridge loan was permanently blocked, saving me from ruin. The foreclosure proceedings on their properties accelerated. Within a month, Richard faced multiple counts of conspiracy, fraud, and wire fraud. Brenda was charged as an accomplice. They faced serious jail time, and their names were permanently tarnished. Their entire financial life was liquidated to cover even a fraction of the penalties and legal fees. As for the wedding itself, the venue was ruined, but the food was not. I had paid for everything: the massive cake, the six-figure catering, the full open bar, with my own legitimately earned funds, which were secured in my separate account. 2 weeks later, I hosted the Freedom Party. I used the non-refundable catering deposit to throw a massive celebration for my real friends, my colleagues, and the PI who had helped me. We held the party right in the abandoned reception hall, which suddenly felt clean and liberating. We drank the expensive champagne, we ate the ridiculously fancy food, and we danced to celebrate our music. I wore a simple black dress, not the heavy white cage. I am free. I learned an invaluable lesson. My expertise is my shield. I am no longer blinded by superficial charm or manipulated by emotional blackmail. My life is built on facts, figures, and meticulous records. I got rid of the garbage, I secured my future, and I walked away with the most expensive, most dramatic story anyone had ever heard. I keep the white folder in my safe. It's the proof that I am not just a brilliant accountant, but a survivor. And I never miss a red flag now.